Most people live with the quiet assumption that they are in control of their own mind, that their thoughts are chosen, that their decisions are deliberate, that their personality is something they consciously built and now steer through the world. But the moment you slow down and look inward, even briefly, that illusion begins to crack. You notice impulses that arrive without permission, emotions that rise before reason has a chance to speak, patterns in your relationships, your fears, your ambitions, repeating themselves like a script you never agreed to read. It starts to feel less like you are driving and more like you are sitting behind the wheel while something older, deeper, and largely invisible is setting the route. The conscious mind, in this sense, is not the engine. It is the dashboard. It shows you speed, direction, warning lights. But the real machinery is hidden beneath layers of psychological hardware and software that evolved long before you were born. And if you never learn how that system works, where it came from, what it wants, and how it quietly influences your choices, you may spend your entire life moving, striving, achieving, only to arrive somewhere that feels strangely empty, misaligned, or deeply wrong. At best, you end up mildly dissatisfied. At worst, lost in a life that doesn't feel like your own. Few thinkers in history took this problem as seriously or as personally as Carl Jung. Jung did not simply study the mind from the outside. He turned inward, using himself as both subject and experiment. His life's work was an attempt to map this hidden navigation system of the psyche, to understand its structures, its symbols, its dangers, and its potential, and to answer a question that still haunts modern life. What does it actually mean to become who you truly are? Jung's journey toward that question did not begin in confidence or clarity. It began in isolation. He was born in 1875 in a small Swiss village, into a household that felt emotionally fractured and psychologically unstable. His father, a pastor, struggled with faith and authority. His mother was distant, depressive, and prone to experience that young Jung could not yet explain. As a child, Jung was deeply introverted. He spent long hours alone, immersed in imagination, fantasy, and private rituals that helped him make sense of an unpredictable inner world. School felt unbearable, not because he lacked intelligence, but because the external structure of education clashed violently with his internal rhythms. At one point, the conflict became so intense that he began fainting regularly. Only later did he realize, almost with shock, that these episodes were psychosomatic. His unconscious had found a way to escape. This early lesson would stay with him for life. When the unconscious is ignored, it does not disappear. It intervenes. It speaks through symptoms. As he grew older, something shifted. Faced with the fear of becoming useless, dependent, or invisible, Jung turned toward discipline and study with remarkable intensity. He read philosophy, theology, ancient myths, and religious texts, not out of dogma, but out of hunger. He wanted to understand the symbolic language human beings had always used to speak about the invisible forces shaping their lives. Eventually, rejecting the religious vocation expected of him, Jung chose medicine and later psychiatry as his path. This decision placed him directly at the border between science and mystery, between measurable symptoms and unmeasurable meaning. While working in psychiatric hospitals, Jung began noticing something strange. Patients who had never met, from vastly different backgrounds, were producing dreams and fantasies with eerily similar symbols. Images of shadows, gods, monsters, wise old figures, mothers, heroes, and inner adversaries appeared again and again. These patterns did not seem random, and they did not feel personal. They felt ancient. As Jung's reputation grew, it inevitably brought him into contact with the most influential psychologist of the time, Sigmund Freud. Their first meeting lasted over 13 hours, an intense, unbroken conversation that felt less like an introduction and more like a collision. At first, Freud saw Jung as a successor. Jung saw Freud as a guide. They analyzed dreams, traveled together, lectured side by side, and pushed psychology into the public consciousness. But beneath the collaboration, tension was building. Freud believed the mind could ultimately be reduced to biological drives, especially sexual ones. Jung sensed something much larger at work. Where Freud saw pathology, Jung saw symbolism. Where Freud wanted explanation, Jung wanted meaning. Over time, their relationship hardened into something resembling a father and a son. And like many such relationships, it could not survive the son's independence. When Jung finally broke away, the cost was enormous. Between 1913 and 1918, he entered what he later described as a confrontation with the unconscious, a period of psychological disintegration, vivid inner visions, emotional instability, and radical self-exploration. Rather than medicating or suppressing these experiences, Jung chose to face them directly. He wrote, he drew, he descended. This descent nearly destroyed him, but it also forged the foundation of everything that would follow. What emerged was not just a theory of psychology, but a philosophy of becoming. At its core was a single, demanding idea that the goal of life is not comfort, not happiness, not social approval, but wholeness. Wholeness for Jung did not mean perfection. It did not mean becoming better behaved, more socially acceptable, or more positive. It meant becoming complete. To understand what that entails, Jung began by redefining what we mean when we talk about the mind, not as a single unified thing, but as a layered system, most of which operates far outside conscious awareness. What we usually call the mind is only the surface, the conscious part, the thoughts you can hear, the decisions you feel you make. The identity you refer to when you say I is only a small island, floating in a vast psychological ocean. Beneath it lies the unconscious, and this unconscious, Jung believed, is not empty, chaotic, or purely primitive. It is structured, alive, purposeful. It shapes your preferences before you choose them, your fears before you name them, your ambitions before you understand why they matter to you. At the center of conscious awareness sits what Jung called the ego. The ego is not who you are, but who you believe yourself to be. It is the narrator of your life story, the organizer of memory, the structure that gives you a sense of continuity through time. Without the ego, there would be no stable identity. But with too much ego, there's blindness. To protect itself, the ego creates an interface between you and the world. Jung called this interface the persona. The persona is the mask you wear, not necessarily a lie, but a selective presentation. It is how you adapt to social expectations, roles, and norms, how you become professional, likable, strong, or competent. The danger of the persona is subtle. Over time, you may forget that it is a mask at all. You begin to believe that who you appear to be is who you actually are. Anything that does not fit this image, undesirable impulses, unacceptable emotions, forbidden interests, weaknesses, doubts, is quietly pushed away, not destroyed, just buried. This rejected material does not vanish. It sinks beneath awareness and forms what Jung called the personal unconscious. Here live the memories you avoid, the traits you deny, the emotions you judge yourself for having. And because they are unconscious, they do not feel like you. They feel like interruptions, overreactions, out of character moments, but they are still active. They influence your behavior indirectly through projection, emotional triggers, irrational dislikes, and compulsive patterns. The more strongly the ego identifies with its persona, the more aggressively it represses what contradicts that image, and the more pressure builds beneath the surface. Jung believed that many psychological symptoms, anxiety, depression, sudden rage, burnout, existential emptiness, are not signs of weakness. They are signals, messages from parts of the psyche that have been excluded for too long. But Jung went further, much further. He noticed that beneath the personal, unconscious, beneath the layers shaped by your individual life experiences, there existed something deeper still, something impersonal, something shared. He called this the collective unconscious, Unlike the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious is not formed by your biography. You are born with it. It contains psychological structures inherited through the entire history of humanity, just as your body inherits biological traits shaped by evolution. These structures do not contain specific memories. They contain patterns, ways of perceiving, ways of responding, ways of making meaning. Jung discovered these patterns not through speculation alone, but through repetition. He saw the same symbolic figures emerge in dreams of patients who had nothing in common culturally or socially. He found the same images in ancient myths, religious stories, and art from civilizations separated by oceans and millennia. Heroes, shadows, mothers, wise elders, tricksters, monsters, sacrifices, deaths and rebirths. These recurring patterns Jung called archetypes. Archetypes are not characters. They are psychological blueprints. They shape how you experience love, authority, danger, purpose, and identity, often without your awareness. You do not choose them. You live them. And one archetype, more than any other, stands at the center of psychological conflict: the shadow. The shadow contains everything the ego refuses to recognize as itself: traits you condemn in others, impulses you label as immoral, potentials you fear acknowledging. The shadow is not inherently evil, but it is dangerous when ignored. What you do not own within yourself, you project onto the world. You see it in enemies, in scapegoats, in strangers who seem to irrationally irritate or disturb you. Jung warned that a person who believes they have no darkness is not enlightened. They are unconscious. The shadow grows stronger in proportion to the ego's denial, and when it finally erupts, it does so destructively, through cruelty, obsession, or self-sabotage. True psychological growth, Jung argued, does not come from eliminating the shadow. It comes from integrating it, from acknowledging your capacity for both creation and destruction, for kindness and cruelty, for wisdom and madness. Only then does the psyche begin to move toward balance. But even shadow integration is not the final stage. At the deepest level of the psyche lies something Jung called the self, not the ego, not the persona, not a role or identity. The self is the totality, the organizing center of the entire psyche, conscious and unconscious together. It is who you are beneath every mask, defense, and story, and the lifelong process of aligning the ego with the self, of slowly bringing unconscious material into awareness and integration, Jung called individuation, not becoming special, becoming whole. Individuation, as Jung understood it, is not a phase of life. It is not something you complete and move beyond. It is a lifelong process, one that begins the moment you start paying attention to the tension between who you appear to be and who you actually are. Most people never consciously enter this process, not because they are incapable, but because individuation demands something modern, life rarely encourages: deep, sustained honesty with oneself. To individuate is to voluntarily step into uncertainty. It means questioning the identity you've been rewarded for, examining the beliefs that once kept you safe, and listening to parts of yourself that you've spent years silencing. The psyche resists this. The ego resists this, because the ego's primary function is not truth, it is stability. It wants predictability. It wants control. It wants coherence. And individuation threatens all three. This is why psychological growth often begins with discomfort, a loss of meaning, a breakdown of identity, a sense that the old story no longer works, but the new one has not yet revealed itself. Jung believed that these moments, often labeled as crises, are actually invitations. The unconscious is pressing upward, demanding recognition. If ignored, it may express itself through symptoms. If acknowledged, it becomes a source of transformation. But this transformation does not occur by force. You cannot command the unconscious. You must engage with it. Jung found that the unconscious communicates not through logic, but through images, through dreams, through symbols, through sudden emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to their cause. These are not errors in the system. They are messages. To individuate is to learn the language of these messages, to approach them not with judgment, but with curiosity. This is where Jung introduced a concept that unsettles many, that psychological health does not mean becoming good. It means becoming real. A person who strives only to be good represses everything they consider bad, and in doing so, hands power to the shadow. Jung observed that some of the most morally rigid individuals were also the most psychologically dangerous. Their darkness had not disappeared. It had simply gone underground. In contrast, the individuated person does not deny their capacity for harm. They recognize it, and by recognizing it, they gain choice. Awareness creates space. Space creates freedom. This does not make the individuated person perfect. It makes them responsible. Another crucial aspect of individuation involves what Jung called the anima and animus. Within every man, Jung believed, exists an unconscious feminine principle, the anima. Within every woman, an unconscious masculine principle, the animus. These are not about gender roles. They are about psychological balance. When these inner opposites are ignored or projected outward, relationships become distorted. You no longer see the other person clearly. You see a projection, an ideal, a savior, an enemy. As individuation progresses, these projections are withdrawn. Energy that was once spent chasing or fighting illusions is reclaimed, and slowly, attention turns inward. This inward turn is often misinterpreted as selfishness or withdrawal. In reality, it is a reorientation. Meaning is not found, it is built, through dialogue with the unconscious, through responsibility for one's shadow, through the courage to live in alignment with the self rather than the persona. This is why Jung believed that psychological work was not separate from life itself. Every conflict, every emotional reaction, every moment of discomfort, each is an opportunity, a doorway, a signal that something within you wants. The individual is no longer trying to become what the world expects. They are listening for what the psyche demands. Jung warned that individuation is not comfortable. It dismantles illusions. It reveals contradictions. It forces you to confront the gap between your self-image and your behavior. But he also believed that without this process, life remains fragmented, driven by unconscious forces, lived reactively rather than deliberately. The individuated life, in contrast, is not free from suffering, but it is meaningful. And meaning, Jung argued, is what allows a human being to endure suffering without becoming bitter or broken, to be seen. And the more honestly you respond, the more integrated you become, not more impressive, more whole. In many ways, Jung believed the modern world makes individuation harder, not easier. We live surrounded by noise, endless information, endless comparison, endless pressure to define ourselves quickly and publicly. Social roles multiply, identities harden. The persona becomes more elaborate, more curated, more rewarded. And the more energy invested in maintaining an external image, the less remains for listening inward. Modern life excels at distraction. It teaches us how to optimize, perform, and present, but rarely how to reflect. As a result, many people reach adulthood highly functional, yet internally fragmented. They know how to succeed, but not why success feels hollow. They know how to stay busy, but not why stillness feels unbearable. Jung would have recognized this immediately. He believed that when a culture loses its connection to the inner world, the unconscious compensates. It erupts through anxiety epidemics, through depression, through addiction, through the sudden fascination with extreme ideologies and identities. When meaning is absent, substitutes rush in. The psyche cannot tolerate emptiness. If it cannot find purpose inwardly, it will attach itself outwardly to power, status, validation, or resentment. This is why Jung saw individuation not only as a personal task, but as a cultural necessity. A society composed of unconscious individuals is easily manipulated, easily polarized, easily driven by fear. But individuation does not require withdrawing from the world. It requires engaging with it differently, from a place of awareness rather than compulsion. Jung emphasized that the goal is not to dissolve the ego, but to relativize it, to recognize that the ego is a tool, not a ruler. When the ego believes it is the center of the psyche, life becomes rigid. When it recognizes its place within a larger whole, flexibility emerges. This shift often happens gradually. A person begins noticing recurring patterns in their life, similar conflicts, similar disappointments, similar emotional reactions in different circumstances. At first, these patterns feel external: bad luck, other people's faults, unfair circumstances. But with enough reflection, a quieter realization forms. Something in me is participating in this. This realization can be unsettling. It removes the comfort of blame, but it also restores agency. If the pattern involves you, then you are not merely a victim of it. You are part of its solution. Jung believed that the psyche is self-regulating. Like the body, it moves toward balance when allowed to communicate. Symptoms, dreams, emotional reactions. These are not malfunctions. They are corrective signals. Ignored long enough, they grow louder. Listened to carefully, they guide. This is why Jung placed such importance on dream analysis. Dreams bypass the ego's defenses. They speak in metaphor, image, and emotion, revealing what the conscious mind refuses to see. To take your inner life seriously is not indulgent. It is responsible. Because what remains unconscious does not remain inactive. It shapes your choices from behind the scenes. And perhaps Jung's most challenging insight is this: you do not become whole by adding something new to yourself. You become whole by reclaiming what you have disowned, the qualities you admire intensely in others, the traits you despise most strongly, the impulses you fear acknowledging. These are clues. They point toward parts of the psyche seeking integration. Individuation is not about self-improvement. It is about self-reconciliation, and reconciliation requires patience. You cannot rush it. You cannot force insight. You can only remain attentive, open, honest. Over time, something subtle begins to change. Decisions feel less reactive. Relationships feel less compulsive. Your sense of direction becomes quieter but clearer. You're no longer trying to become someone. You're uncovering someone. For Jung, the ultimate question was never how to avoid suffering. It was how to suffer meaningfully. Pain, he believed, is not a flaw in existence. It is a condition of consciousness. The moment a human being becomes aware, they become divided between instinct and reflection, between desire and responsibility, between who they are and who they could become. Individuation does not eliminate this tension. It gives it a direction. When life feels unbearable, it is often not because there's too much pain, but because the pain feels pointless. Jung understood that meaning does not arrive fully formed. It emerges slowly, through the willingness to confront inner conflict rather than escape it. This is why individuation often feels like a descent before it feels like a rise. You must move closer to what you fear in yourself, closer to what you have avoided naming, closer to the contradictions that make you uncomfortable, not to indulge them, but to understand them. The paradox is that wholeness does not make you lighter. It makes you steadier. You stop demanding that life conform to your expectations and start asking what it is asking of you. Jung believed that every individual carries a unique pattern of meaning, a particular way the self wants to express itself in the world. Ignoring this pattern leads to restlessness, bitterness, or despair. Listening to it does not guarantee happiness, but it does offer coherence. And coherence is what allows a person to move through chaos without losing themselves. To become your true self, in Jung's sense, is not to discover a fixed identity. It is to remain in dialogue with the unconscious throughout your life, to notice when the persona hardens, to recognize when the shadow is projecting, to listen when dreams, emotions, or conflicts point toward neglected parts of the psyche. It is a practice, a responsibility. And in a world that constantly pressures you to define yourself from the outside, this inward responsibility becomes quietly radical. You're no longer living according to borrowed values, no longer driven by unconscious imitation, no longer mistaking the mask for the face beneath it. You are not free from uncertainty, but you are oriented, and orientation is enough. Jung once wrote that the task of human existence is to bring light into the darkness of mere being, not all at once, not completely, but enough to see where you are going. If this exploration of the inner world resonated with you, take a moment, not to agree or disagree, but to reflect. What patterns keep repeating in your life? What parts of yourself have you been avoiding? And what might happen if, instead of resisting them, you listened? If you found value here, consider staying with the conversation. These ideas unfold slowly, over time, just like the process they describe.